beyond Achilles, there was another young Greek hero whose name was immortalized for fighting before the walls of Troy. He was not a time-forged king like Nestor or Agamemnon, nor a cunning strategist like Odysseus or Palamedes. His name was Patroclus, and his identity mirrored that of the very embodiment of war, Achilles. If Achilles was the storm, the divine fury and blinding glory, Patroclus was the earth that received the rain, the stillness before the thunder, and the shadow that gave depth to the light. His story is not that of a demigod who sought glory for himself, but of a man who wore another's glory out of compassion, and with that sealed the fate of all. His journey began not with a prophecy of grandeur, but with error and exile. In his youth, a fit of anger during a game led him to take the life of a companion. It was the kind of mistake that marks a man forever, a ghost that would follow him all his life. Forced to flee his homeland, he found refuge in the realm of Phthia, under the protection of King Peleus. There, in that unlikely refuge, his destiny intertwined with that of the young prince Achilles. While Achilles was raised to be a god among men, trained by the centaur Chiron in the arts of war and healing, Patroclus grew at his side, not as a servant, but as the other half of the same soul. Achilles, with a goddess's blood running through his veins, possessed a fury that set him apart from mortals. He was swift, lethal, and brilliant, but also proud and distant, like a star admired from afar, whose heat burns those who draw too near. Patroclus was his bridge to the world. A little older, more measured, he was the anchor that kept Achilles' ship moored to the shore of humanity. There was between them a loyalty that transcended friendship. Patroclus saw in Achilles the greatness he himself would never have, and Achilles found in Patroclus the refuge, calm, and conscience his impetuous nature denied him. They were the warrior and his heart, and they marched to Troy together, not as a prince and his squire, but as a single, indivisible force. During the first 9 years of the war, while the Greek armies fought beneath Troy's walls, Patroclus remained a constant yet discreet presence. He fought bravely and tended the wounded with the skill he had learned from Chiron, but his true role unfolded far from the battlefield, in the tent he shared with Achilles. It was he who soothed the hero's anger, who heard his frustrations, who reminded him of the world beyond his own thirst for glory. When the great fracture among the Achaeans occurred, when Agamemnon's pride wounded Achilles' honor and Achilles, in monumental wrath, withdrew from the war, it was Patroclus who stayed by his side. But unlike Achilles, who closed himself within his resentment, Patroclus kept his eyes open. From his privileged and yet torturous vantage point, he saw what his friend's fury was causing. He saw the Greek ships threatened by Trojan fire, heard the laments for warriors who fell day after day, and felt the weight of despair settling over the Achaean camp. The pain of his compatriots became his own. While Achilles saw only his stained honor, Patroclus saw the crumbling of a common cause. The collective suffering ate at him in a way a personal affront never could. It was this empathy, this ability to feel another's pain as his own, that turned him from an observer into the pivotal catalyst in the war between Greeks and Trojans. Unable to bear the sight of his friends being slaughtered, he approached Achilles not with a counselor's logic, but with the desperate plea of a broken heart. He confronted the hero, calling his intransigence cruel and inhuman, and begged that if he would not fight, he at least allow Patroclus to go in his stead, wearing his armor to give the Greeks hope and terrify the Trojans. Achilles, moved by his companion's pain, yielded. He handed over his divine armor, the very panoply that made him a specter of death on the battlefield. In that moment, Patroclus ceased to be himself and became an echo of Achilles. The armor was at once a blessing and a curse. With it, he bore the aura of the greatest warrior in the world, but also the weight of an identity not his own, and a target for the fury of gods and men. Achilles warned him with words that would seal his fate: drive the Trojans from the ships, but do not advance to the walls. When Patroclus burst onto the battlefield, the effect was immediate and overwhelming. The Trojans, advancing with the certainty of victory, fell back in panic, believing Achilles' fury and his myrmidons had returned. The man who had once been a quiet presence became a whirlwind of destruction. He was not merely an imposter posing as a warrior. The courage that had always lived in his chest, freed by the urgency of the moment, manifested with brutal force. He led the Myrmidons, broke the enemy lines, and in his supreme moment of glory, killed the renowned Trojan ally Sarpedon, son of Zeus himself, a deed that put him in direct conflict with fate. But glory, for a mortal who dares to touch the divine, is a very sweet poison. Drunk on success, feeling the armor's power and the roar of battle, Patroclus forgot Achilles' warning. He was seized by a drive to end the war once and for all. He did not stop at the ships. He chased the retreating Trojans to the foot of Troy's unassailable walls. There he challenged the very limits of his mortality. 3 times he assaulted the walls, and 3 times he was driven back by the god Apollo, Troy's protector. The god warned him to withdraw, for it was not his fate to take the city that day. But at the height of his fury, blind to divine warnings, Patroclus sealed his end. Enraged by his audacity, Apollo struck him from behind, tearing away his helmet and his wits. Stunned and exposed, he was wounded by the spear of the Trojan Euphorbus, and at last was dealt the fatal blow by Hector, Prince of Troy, who, seeing the great warrior disoriented, seized the chance to claim the glory. Patroclus fell, a victim of his own unbridled courage. Over the fallen body unfolded an act of supreme arrogance, a sacrilege that would echo through the heavens and seal Hector's own fate. The Prince of Troy, with blood still hot and dripping from his spear, was not content with the enemy's death. He saw the divine armor Patroclus wore, the work of Hephaestus, a gift from the gods to Peleus, and coveted it. In a profane gesture of triumph, Hector stripped the corpse, tearing away piece by piece the immortal gleam that had covered mortal flesh. Hector was not merely taking spoils of war, he was clothing himself in death itself. A new battle erupted, not for territory or glory, but for the vulnerable body of Patroclus. One last desperate effort by the Achaeans to honor the man who had died to save them. Patroclus's death was not merely the fall of another warrior, it was the sound of a world breaking. The news, carried to Achilles, brought not sorrow, but a cataclysm. Achilles' grief was primal, inhuman. He tore his clothes, ripped out his hair, and roared in a way that made his mother, the goddess Thetis, rise from the depths of the sea. In that moment, the world understood Patroclus's true importance. He was not Achilles' shadow, he was his soul. With his death, the hero's proud wrath became a torrent of mourning and vengeance that nothing could stop. The war, for Achilles, was no longer about honor and glory. It was about Hector. It was about hunting the man who had taken his other half. When at last Patroclus's body was recovered and borne to Achilles' tent, the hero's pain transfigured into a grand and terrible rite of mourning. The funeral pyre was raised, monumental, like the grief that inspired it. Upon it, Achilles laid his beloved companion's body, covering it with honey and precious unguents. But honor was not limited to riches. In a fury of grief that blurred the line between hero and monster, Achilles sacrificed 12 young Trojan prisoners, their lives offered as a dark oblation to Patroclus's shade. Achilles himself led the funeral lament, cutting his long golden hair, which had been consecrated to a river god of his homeland, and placing it in his friend's cold hands. He refused to eat or bathe until vengeance was complete. That night, Patroclus' spirit appeared to him in a dream, pleading for a swift cremation, so that he might finally cross the river Acheron and find peace. The funeral became a solemn oath, sealed with fire, blood, and tears, that Achilles' world would make sense again, only when Hector's blood was spilled upon that very ground. In the end, Patroclus was remembered not for his deeds, but for the void he left behind. His death was the sacrifice that roused the fury which would at last turn the tide of war, leading to the death of Hector, Troy's great defender. Patroclus was the echo that, when silenced, made room for a cry of infinite pain.